My name is Mark Chandler. I'm 41 years old, and I'm about to tell you a story that still makes my blood boil every time I think about it. It's about loyalty, family, and how sometimes the people closest to you can cut you the deepest. To continue listening to this beautiful and special story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Write your name and the city you're watching from so I can include a special greeting for you in an upcoming story. 15 years ago, I was working at a dead-end job in Toledo, Ohio, making barely enough to cover rent on my studio apartment. My dad, Robert Chandler, had this dream of starting an industrial supply company. He'd sit in his garage every evening after work, surrounded by catalogs and spreadsheets, talking about how we could make it big selling equipment to local manufacturers. The thing is, my dad was a dreamer, not a doer. He'd spent 20 years working maintenance at a steel plant, and while he knew equipment inside and out, he had no clue about running a business. That's where I came in. I remember that first night he asked me to help him organize his office, and I used that term loosely. The garage was cluttered with sample parts, business cards from trade shows, and notebooks filled with his messy handwriting. The smell of motor oil and old cardboard filled the air, and there was this constant hum from the old refrigerator he kept his beer in. "Mark," he said, cracking open a Budweiser, "I think we got something here, but I need someone who understands computers and all that modern stuff." I looked around at the chaos and saw potential, not because of his vision, but because I could see what it could become with the right execution. That night, I made a decision that would define the next decade and a half of my life. The early days were brutal. I'd work my regular job during the day, then come to the garage, which we'd converted into our headquarters, and work until 2 or 3 in the morning. I taught myself QuickBooks, built our first website on a second-hand computer, and cold-called manufacturers until my voice gave out. My dad would show up around dinner time, full of enthusiasm and big ideas, but when it came to the grunt work, he'd find reasons to leave early. "You got this handled, son," he'd say, patting my shoulder. "I'll handle the big picture stuff." The big picture stuff, apparently, was drinking beer and telling his buddies at the local diner about his business empire. I didn't mind, though. I was learning something new every day. I figured out how to negotiate with suppliers, how to read financial statements, and most importantly, how to build relationships with customers. It wasn't just about selling them parts, it was about understanding their problems and becoming someone they could trust. There were nights I'd fall asleep right there on the garage floor, using a pile of inventory catalogs as a pillow. The concrete was cold, and I'd wake up with my back aching, but I'd grab a cup of coffee and get right back to work. My girlfriend at the time, Sarah, thought I was crazy. "You're killing yourself for a business that isn't even yours," she'd tell me during our increasingly rare phone calls. But it felt like mine. Every invoice I processed, every customer relationship I built, every late night I spent organizing our systems, it was all mine. The business was growing because of my work, my dedication, my sacrifices. Year 3 was when everything changed. I'd been nurturing a relationship with Midwest Manufacturing, one of the biggest players in the region. Their purchasing manager, Jim Morrison, had become not just a client, but a friend. We'd grab lunch once a month, and I'd always ask about his challenges, his goals, his frustrations with other suppliers. One day, Jim called me with an opportunity that would make or break us. They needed an exclusive supplier for a major expansion project. 6 months of steady orders that would triple our revenue. "Mark," he said, over the phone, "I've been watching how you operate. You're not just trying to sell me stuff. You actually care about our success. That's rare." I spent the next week preparing the most detailed proposal I'd ever written. I analyzed their needs, projected costs, and created a timeline that would ensure they never ran short on critical components. When I presented it to Jim and his team, they were impressed enough to give us the contract on the spot. That contract changed everything. We moved out of the garage into a real office space, a 3,000 square foot facility on the outskirts of Toledo. We hired our first employees, invested in better inventory management systems, and I finally felt like we were building something substantial. My dad was over the moon. He'd bring his friends by the office, showing off our new space like he'd built it himself. "This is what vision looks like," he'd tell them. While I sat in the back office processing orders and managing our growing client base. But I didn't care about the credit. I was proud of what we'd accomplished. The business was thriving, our employees were happy, and I was learning skills that would serve me for the rest of my career. Success brought new challenges, and the biggest one came in the form of my cousin Ryan. He was my dad's brother's son, fresh out of college with a finance degree and big city ambitions. He'd grown up in New York, wore expensive suits to family barbecues, and had this way of talking that made everything sound like a business school case study. Ryan would visit us twice a year, usually around Christmas and the 4th of July, and he'd spend the whole time analyzing our operation like he was some kind of consultant. He'd walk around the office, ask questions about our processes, and take notes on his phone. "You guys are doing great," he'd tell us, "but there's so much untapped potential here. You need to think bigger, more strategically." The thing is, I knew our business inside and out. I understood our customers, our suppliers, our market. What we were doing was working, and working well. But Ryan had this confidence that came from never having failed at anything, never having spent a night sleeping on a garage floor, wondering if you could make payroll. My dad, though, was fascinated by Ryan's polish. He'd hang on every word, asking questions about marketing strategies and growth models. It was like he was meeting a version of himself he'd always wanted to be: educated, sophisticated, wearing a $1,000 suit. "That boy's got something special," he'd tell me after Ryan left. "Real business savvy." I tried not to let it bother me. After all, I was the one running the day-to-day operations. I was the one our customers called when they had problems. I was the one who'd built the relationships that kept us profitable. In year 12, my dad made a decision that should have been a warning sign. He invited Ryan to come work with us, offering him a position as business development manager, with a salary that was suspiciously close to what I was making. "He can help us expand," my dad explained. "Bring some of that big city expertise to our operation." Ryan accepted immediately. He moved to Toledo, found a downtown loft apartment, and showed up to work every day in a different suit. The contrast was stark. I'd be in jeans and a polo shirt, focused on getting work done, while Ryan looked like he was ready for a board meeting. To his credit, Ryan wasn't lazy. He threw himself into learning our systems, understanding our processes, and getting to know our customers. The problem was, he approached everything like a textbook case study, instead of a real business with real relationships. I spent months training him, showing him the nuances of our industry, introducing him to our key contact. I taught him how to read the subtle signs that a customer was having cash flow problems, how to negotiate payment terms that worked for everyone, how to handle the inevitable crises that came with industrial supply. "This is fascinating," he'd say, taking notes while I explained why we extended credit terms to certain customers. "Have you considered implementing a more systematic approach to credit analysis?" He meant well, I think, but there was something about his approach that rubbed me the wrong way. He saw everything in terms of systems and processes, while I saw people and relationships. Both perspectives had value, but I'd learned mine through years of experience, not from a textbook. Over the next 2 years, I watched Ryan slowly insert himself into conversations and decisions that had always been my domain. He'd sit in on client meetings, contribute to strategic planning sessions, and gradually position himself as the fresh perspective our business needed. My dad ate it up. He'd listen to Ryan's presentations about market expansion and digital transformation, like he was hearing the word of God. Meanwhile, I was the one actually implementing the day-to-day changes that kept our business competitive. The frustrating part was that Ryan was actually good at some things. He had a talent for presenting our capabilities to potential clients, and his financial background helped him identify opportunities I might have missed. But he also had a way of taking credit for collaborative efforts and positioning himself as the strategic mind behind our continued success. I started to feel like I was watching someone else get credit for a house I'd built with my own hands. Every time Ryan made a suggestion that worked out, my dad would praise his innovative thinking. When I pointed out that we'd been doing something similar for years, the response was always the same. But Ryan found a way to optimize it. The worst part was the way our employees started to treat Ryan. He had this natural charisma that drew people in, and his polished presentation style made him seem like leadership material. I'd overhear conversations where people would refer to him as the future of the company, or the one with the vision. It stung, but I told myself it didn't matter. I knew what I'd contributed. I knew the business would fall apart without my operational knowledge and customer relationships. I was secure in my value, even if others couldn't see it. Every year, we held a company dinner at the Toledo Country Club. It was a tradition I'd started back in year 5, when we first became profitable enough to afford it. It was our way of celebrating our success and showing our employees how much we appreciated their hard work. The dinner in year 15 was different, though. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that something big was going to happen. My dad had been unusually secretive in the weeks leading up to it, having private conversations with Ryan and making mysterious comments about exciting announcements. I figured he was going to announce a bonus program, or maybe a new client contract. We'd had a great year, our best ever, and there was plenty to celebrate. I'd played a huge role in landing several major accounts, and I was looking forward to the recognition. The dinner started normally enough. We had cocktails, made small talk with our employees and their spouses, and enjoyed a nice meal. My dad gave his usual speech about the company's growth and our bright future. Then he paused, looked around the room, and smiled. "I have an important announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "As our company continues to grow, we need leadership that can take us to the next level. Someone who brings a sharp look and fresh presence to our operations." I felt my stomach drop. I knew what was coming, but I couldn't quite believe it. "I'm naming Ryan as our new director of operations," my dad continued. "He brings the kind of strategic thinking and professional presence that will help us expand into new markets and strengthen our position in the industry." The room erupted in applause. I sat there, frozen, watching Ryan stand up and shake hands with everyone around him. He looked embarrassed, like he hadn't expected this public announcement. But he also looked pleased. Then my dad looked directly at me. "Mark, you've done incredible groundwork over the years. You've built the foundation that makes this transition possible. Now let Ryan take us to the next level." I blinked. He blinked back. That was it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. 15 years of my life, 15 years of building something from nothing, and my reward was watching someone else get the title I'd earned. I thought about all the nights I'd slept on the garage floor, all the weekends I'd spent learning new skills, all the relationships I'd built with customers and suppliers. I thought about the contracts I'd negotiated, the crises I'd managed, the growth I'd driven, and I thought about Ryan, who'd been with us for less than 3 years, getting promoted to a position that should have been mine. The next morning, I drove to the office early, before anyone else arrived. I sat in my car in the parking lot, looking at the building I'd helped create, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to march into my dad's office and demand an explanation. Part of me wanted to quit on the spot. Instead, I walked inside, logged into our systems, and started transferring my access to Ryan. If he was going to be the director of operations, he'd need to understand everything I'd been managing. I spent the morning documenting processes, compiling contact lists, and organizing files. By the time Ryan arrived, I had everything ready for him. He looked uncomfortable, like he knew this wasn't how things should have gone. "Mark," he said, "I want you to know I didn't ask for this." I had no idea he was going to make that announcement. I looked at him, this polished young man in his expensive suit, and I realized I didn't hate him. I felt sorry for him. He was about to inherit a job he wasn't prepared for, managing relationships he didn't understand, making decisions that would affect people's livelihood. "Just take care of our people," I told him. "They're good people, and they deserve better than to be casualties of family politics." Then I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to our employees, and walked out of the building I'd helped create. I drove to Indianapolis that afternoon. 6 months earlier, Tom Bradley, who ran procurement for a major manufacturing company, had offered me a consulting position. He'd been one of our suppliers before becoming a customer, and he'd watched me work for years. "Mark," he'd told me during a lunch meeting, "if you ever get tired of working for someone else, give me a call. I could use someone with your expertise and customer relationships." I turned him down at the time, citing family loyalty. But sitting in his office that evening, family loyalty felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. "I'm surprised to see you," Tom said, leaning back in his chair. "But I'm not surprised by what you're telling me. I've seen this story before. The person who builds the business gets pushed aside for someone who looks the part. The position was perfect for me. I'd be working with manufacturers across the Midwest, helping them optimize their supply chains and build stronger vendor relationships. It was exactly the kind of work I'd been doing for years, but now I'd be doing it for multiple companies instead of just one. More importantly, I'd be working with people who valued my experience and expertise, not just my willingness to work for family rate." Tom made me an offer that was 30% higher than what I'd been making in Toledo. He also offered equity in his company and a path to partnership within 5 years. I accepted on the spot, For the next 6 months, I threw myself into my new role. I traveled throughout the Midwest, meeting with manufacturers, analyzing their operations, and helping them build more efficient supply chains. It was challenging work, but it was also incredibly rewarding. I was good at it. My clients appreciated my practical approach and my ability to understand their challenges from both sides of the vendor relationship. Word spread quickly about my expertise, and soon I was booked solid with consulting engagements. Then Ryan called. Mark, Ryan's voice was shaky when he called me on a Tuesday morning in March. I need to talk to you. We have a problem. I was in my car, driving between client meetings, and I almost didn't answer. But something in his voice told me this was important. What's going on, Ryan? It's the Morrison account, he said. Jim Morrison, from Midwest Manufacturing. The contract renewal went sideways, and they're threatening to pull all their business. My blood went cold. Jim Morrison wasn't just our biggest client. He was one of my closest business relationships. I'd worked with him for over a decade, and Midwest Manufacturing represented almost 30% of our revenue. What happened? I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. I tried to renegotiate the terms, Ryan explained. Their contract was up for renewal, and I thought we could get better pricing and payment terms. But Jim got upset about some of the changes, and now he's saying we violated his trust. I pulled over to the side of the road. This was worse than I'd imagined. Jim Morrison valued relationships above everything else. He'd told me countless times that he stayed with us, not because we were the cheapest, but because we were reliable and honest. Ryan, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, Jim doesn't care about saving a few dollars. He cares about knowing that his supplier will be there when he needs them. What exactly did you change? The details were even worse than I'd feared. Ryan had tried to implement industry-standard contract terms that would have shifted more risk to Midwest Manufacturing. He'd presented it as a modernization of their agreement, but Jim saw it as a betrayal of their long-standing relationship. He said he's been thinking about this for weeks, Ryan continued. He feels like we don't understand his business anymore, like we're just another vendor trying to squeeze him for profit. I closed my eyes. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. Ryan understood the theory of business relationships, but he'd never learned the practice. He'd never spent years building trust with a client, never learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when someone was feeling pressured or undervalued. What does my dad want me to do? I asked. He wants to know if you could consult on this, Ryan. Maybe give us some advice on how to fix it. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the traffic rush past on the highway. This was my opportunity to be vindicated, to prove that my experience and relationships were irreplaceable. But it was also my opportunity to be the bigger person. I'm sorry, Ryan, I said finally. I'm fully booked with other clients. I can't take on any consulting work right now. It wasn't entirely true. I could have made time if I'd wanted to. But I'd learned something important over the past 6 months. I didn't build that business for a title or for recognition. I built it because I was good at it, because I enjoyed the work, and because I wanted to create something meaningful. Now I was doing the same thing, but on my own terms, with people who valued my contributions from day one. Ryan was quiet for a moment. I understand, he said finally. I'm sorry about how things went down. You deserved better. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a few more minutes, thinking about the path that had led me here. My dad had given Ryan my title because he wore a tie and spoke the language of business school. But when the real challenges came, when relationships needed to be salvaged and trust needed to be rebuilt, they came looking for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ryan had the title, the office, the authority. But I had the track record, the relationships, and the expertise. And in the end, that's what mattered. I started my car and drove to my next client meeting, where I was valued not for how I looked or what I wore, but for what I could deliver. It had taken me 15 years to learn that lesson, but it was worth every day of the journey. 3 months later, I heard through the grapevine that Midwest Manufacturing had indeed pulled their contract. The business I'd helped build was struggling, and my dad was talking about bringing in outside management to turn things around. I didn't call to offer help. I'd moved on to bigger and better things, working with clients who appreciated my expertise and treated me as a partner, not just an employee. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being too successful to care about getting even.